The rain slashed through the dense canopy, turning the ground into a slick, treacherous trap. Eve's breath came in ragged bursts as she sprinted between gnarled, alien trees, her pulse hammering in her ears. Behind her, something monstrous crashed through the undergrowth, its guttural growl reverberating through the night like a primal war cry. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The apex stalker was engineered for pursuit, its elongated limbs built for speed, its jagged maw filled with serrated teeth meant to tear through flesh and armor alike. Eve's only advantage was knowledge. The terrain, the patterns of these creatures, the few precious seconds she had to make decisions that meant the difference between survival and death. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the endless forest of Valkyra, 9 in eerie shades of blue and silver. The planet was a graveyard of corporate ambition, its ecosystem twisted by the remains of forgotten experiments. Humans had come here once, believing they could tame it. They had failed. Her foot slipped on the rain-slicked ground, sending her careening forward. She caught herself against a thick root just as the apex stalker lunged. A blur of motion, the stench of wet fur and blood, and then impact. A searing pain shot through her left shoulder as its claws raked across her armor, barely missing flesh. Eve twisted, rolling beneath its attack, and fired her plasma pistol point-blank into its side. The creature screeched as the shot burned through its hide, but it wasn't enough to kill. It never was. The apex stalker tensed, preparing to pounce again. Eve knew she wouldn't dodge it this time. The exhaustion in her limbs was setting in, slowing her just enough to be fatal. And then the shadows moved. A blur of darkness. A low, bone-chilling growl. Something far larger than the apex stalker slammed into its side, sending it sprawling with a snarl of rage. The earth shook as claws met claws, fangs snapped, and something monstrous fought something worse. Nyx. Eve scrambled backward, pressing herself against the damp bark of a tree as she watched her companion tear into the apex stalker with ruthless precision. Nyx was a wolf in form, but far from natural. Massive, his body armored with plates of adaptive biometal, his eyes burning with an eerie blue glow. He moved with the lethal grace of a predator that had been built for war. The apex stalker fought wildly, screeching as it raked its claws across Nyx's flank. Sparks flew as the blow skidded off Nyx's armor, and the massive wolf barely flinched. With a snarl, he clamped his powerful jaws around the stalker's throat and bit down. Bone cracked, muscle tore, and the stalker's death wail faded into nothing. Silence settled over the forest, broken only by the patter of rain. Eve exhaled, slowly lowering her pistol. Her shoulder throbbed where the apex had grazed her, but she forced herself to her feet. Nyx turned to her, his glowing eyes scanning her for injuries, his breathing heavy but controlled. "You're late," she muttered, wiping rain from her face. Nyx huffed, stepping closer. The neural link between them flared to life, not through words, but impressions, concern, satisfaction, the instinctual relief of a predator confirming the kill. Eve placed a hand against Nyx's shoulder, feeling the faint hum of the biometal plating beneath his fur. His body was warm despite the rain, his presence grounding. They had been together too long for fear to ever exist between them. A sound cut through the quiet, a mechanical whir, distant but closing in fast. Eve got twisted. Drones. She grabbed Nyx's fur and pulled him into motion, slipping into the dense cover of the trees. The apex stalker had been hunting her, but the drones weren't here for it. They were here for them. Eve didn't know how long she had before they reached her location, but the answer was never long enough. She moved quickly, pushing through thick undergrowth, her muscles aching with exhaustion. Nyx followed at her side, his massive form making almost no sound. The air shifted, a faint tremor rippling through the ground. The drones were close. Eve ducked into a natural overhang formed by a tangle of twisted roots and decayed stone, pressing herself against the damp earth. Nyx crouched beside her, his body tense. Through the gaps in the foliage, she saw them. Sleek, black machines, hovering with eerie precision. Their sensors swept over the terrain, scanning for movement. These weren't corporate patrol drones. No, these belonged to something worse. Hunters. Eve's jaw clenched. She had spent years avoiding them, slipping between the cracks of their surveillance. The corporations had invested billions into creatures like Nyx, living weapons bred for war. And when the war ended, they had deemed their creations expendable. But some of them, like Nyx, had survived, and some of them, like Eve, had refused to let them be erased. The neural link pulsed, Nyx's unease pressing against her mind. He wanted to fight. She wanted to run. But it was too late. One of the drones hesitated midair, its scanners flickering. Eve held her breath. For one agonizing moment, she thought they might have slipped past undetected. Then the alarm blared. The drone fired. A bolt of energy slammed into the ground inches from her foot, scorching the dirt. Eve cursed, snapping her rifle up, and fired back. The first shot struck dead center, sending the drone spiraling out of control before exploding in a burst of white light. More followed. Nyx leaped from cover with a snarl, taking down one in a blur of fangs and claws, his reinforced teeth tearing through metal like paper. Eve moved fast, ducking between trees as she took down another. But the damage was done. Their position was compromised. In the distance, a mechanical voice crackled over the rain. Target confirmed. Initiating capture protocol. Eve's pulse spiked. She turned to Nyx, grabbing his fur as the forest erupted with movement. Shadows flickered between the trees. Humanoid figures in dark armor, weapons raised. Not drones. Not machines. Real hunters. The chase had only just begun. Eve moved like a ghost through the undergrowth, her breath steady despite the fire in her lungs. The rain had softened to a mist, clinging to her skin like cold fingers. Beside her, Nyx was a shadow, his massive form moving with unnatural silence. The neural link pulsed between them, faint impressions of tension, urgency, the hunt closing in. They had seconds, maybe less. The first gunshot cracked through the night. A tree splintered inches from Eve's head, bark exploding in a lethal spray. She twisted, diving behind a thick root as Nyx leapt forward, his form vanishing into the dark. The hunters weren't sloppy. They moved in coordinated patterns, pushing her toward a choke point. A clearing up ahead where the terrain offered no cover. A trap. Eve's mind raced. No good options. No time. Asterisk asterisk. Her fingers grazed the mud, slick and cold. She could almost hear the calculations in Nyx's breathing. They had run this scenario before, different forests, different enemies. But always the same choice. Fight or die. The first hunter emerged from the shadows, armor matte black, rifle raised. Eve didn't hesitate. She fired first, a controlled burst that hit just beneath the man's shoulder plate. He staggered, not dead, but wounded enough to slow. Eve didn't waste time. She spun low, cutting across the terrain as another shot rang out. This one aimed for her back. Nyx hit the shooter before the trigger could be pulled again. A flash of fangs, a scream cut short. Blood misted the air. Eve didn't stop to look. More shapes moved between the trees. She counted at least 5 more. No way out. Then she saw it. A gap in the ridge, a drop leading down to the river. Treacherous, unforgiving, but better than dying here. She sprinted. The hunters shouted behind her, weapons barking, bullets ripping through the leaves. Nyx was at her heels, his body tense with the instinct to stay and fight. She forced a single thought through the link. Run. The ground vanished beneath her. For an agonizing second, she was weightless, plummeting into darkness. The cold hit her like a wall. Icy water swallowed her whole, wrenching the air from her lungs. She kicked hard, breaking the surface just in time to see Nyx land beside her, his massive form sending a wave crashing over her head. Above them, gunfire rattled, but the hunters wouldn't follow. Not yet. The current was too strong, too unpredictable. Eve and Nyx weren't worth the risk. She let the river take her, her body limp, her mind racing. They had escaped, but only for now. When they finally washed up on the shore, the night had grown eerily still. The scent of damp earth and alien flora clung to the air. Eve coughed, pushing herself up on shaking arms. Nyx stood beside her, his bioluminescent eyes scanning the darkness, hackles raised. They had to keep moving. A few miles deeper into the jungle, they found shelter, a cavern half hidden by tangled roots. Eve collapsed inside, her body exhausted, her shoulder burning from where the apex stalker had struck her earlier. She checked the wound. The armor had absorbed most of the impact, but the bruising was deep. Nothing lethal. Nyx circled the entrance, restless. The neural link pulsed with his unease. He didn't trust this place. Neither did she. Still, they needed a moment to breathe. Eve pulled off her soaked gloves, flexing her fingers against the cold. Her body ached, but her mind refused to rest. They had made a mistake. The hunters hadn't just been after her. They had called Nyx something. ** Project Fenrir. ** The name dug in her brain like a splinter. She had stolen him from a corporate lab years ago, barely understanding what he was back then. Just another experiment, another casualty of human greed. But if they still wanted him now, if they had sent a team for him, then she had underestimated his importance. The thought made her stomach turn. Nyx let out a low, rumbling sound. A warning. Eve's fingers tightened around her rifle. They weren't alone. She caught the scent then. Burned metal, synthetic oil. Drones. Small ones. Scouts. She pressed herself against the cavern wall, signaling Nyx to stay low. The machines hovered outside, their red sensors flickering against the darkness. Searching. Calculating. One drifted closer. Too close. Eve moved fast, jamming her knife into its core before it could sound an alarm. Sparks hissed. The drone collapsed, but the others had already detected the disturbance. The cavern erupted in mechanical shrieks as the swarm descended. Eve fired, dropping two before they could react, but the rest came faster. She felt the electric charge in the air before she saw the pulse cannon warming up. Nyx hit her hard, knocking her clear just as the blast ripped through the cavern. The impact sent Eve sprawling. Static crackled in her ears, pain flaring through her ribs. She scrambled up, vision swimming, and saw Nyx tearing through the last drone, its wreckage sparking beneath his claws. Silence. Eve coughed, tasting blood. The drones are down, but the hunters knew where they were now. She forced herself to her feet. They had to move. Nyx's gaze locked onto hers, his massive frame tensed, waiting for direction. There was only one option left. The facility. The thought made her skin crawl. She had sworn never to go back. But if they were calling Nyx by a designation, if they had been tracking him this whole time, it meant answers were there. And she needed answers. Nyx stepped closer, his bioluminescence casting a faint glow against the cave walls. He didn't resist. He understood. They moved as one, slipping back into the jungle. The rain had stopped, but the air was thick with the scent of something old, something waiting. The hunt wasn't over. It was just beginning. The facility loomed ahead, half swallowed by the jungle. Time had not been kind to it. Vines coiled around rusted towers. Shattered glass reflected the pale light of Valkyra 9's twin moons, and the metal walls bore deep scars, claw marks. Something had been here before them. Eve crouched at the tree line, pulse steady despite the tension winding through her muscles. Nyx remained still beside her, his massive frame blending into the shadows. His bioluminescent eyes flickered as he scanned the ruins, the neural link between them humming with wary anticipation. No movement. No guards. Too easy. Her fingers tightened around her rifle. There was no way the hunters had abandoned this place. Not if they had been tracking Nyx back to it. Which meant they were inside. She exhaled slowly and moved. Nyx followed, his footfalls unervingly silent for something so large. The closer they got, the more the air thickened with a strange, metallic scent. The jungle around them felt unnaturally still, as if the very planet was holding its breath. Eve reached the entrance, an old security door, half ajar. No lights, no sounds. She pressed her palm against the cold metal, peering into the darkness beyond. Nyx let out the faintest growl, a warning vibrating through the link. Something was waiting. She slipped inside. The air was stale, thick with dust and decay. Dim emergency lights flickered along the walls, casting jagged shadows. The layout was familiar. She had studied stolen blueprints for years, memorized every corridor, every escape route. But the reality felt different. Smaller, colder. Nyx's presence at her back was the only thing keeping the walls from closing in. She moved forward, past abandoned workstations and shattered screens. The facility had been left to rot, but she could still see the ghost of what it had been. A lab, a prison, a place where monsters were made. And Nyx had been one of them. The thought gnawed at her. She had known he wasn't natural, had always suspected there was more to his creation than the scattered files she had stolen years ago. But Project Fenrir? The name carried weight. Purpose. He wasn't just an experiment. He was something worse. A sound. She froze. Not mechanical. Not a drone. Footsteps. Nyx shifted beside her, his body lowering into a predatory stance. They weren't alone. Eve slid into cover, her grip firm on a rifle. Through the dim glow of the emergency lights, she saw them. 3 figures, moving with precision. Black armor. Suppressed rifles. The hunters. They weren't searching. They knew she was here. Her mind worked fast. 3 was manageable, but not if they had reinforcements. And they would. Nyx pressed against her, the link flaring. He was ready to attack. She held up 2 fingers. Wait. The hunters moved closer, weapons raised. She could hear them whispering through their comms. She won't leave without it. Cut off the exits. They were right. Eve exhaled. Then she moved. She fired first, a clean shot that hit the lead hunter square in the chest. He crumpled before he could react. The others scattered, suppressing fire lighting up the corridor. Eve ducked, shifting position just as Nyx launched forward with snarl. The second hunter barely had time to scream before Nyx's jaws crushed his throat. The third hesitated. A fatal mistake. Eve was faster. 1 shot, precise, and he was down. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the soft hum of Nyx's breathing. She didn't stop moving. More were coming. She grabbed a data module from the fallen leader's belt, shoving it into her pack. No time to check its contents now. If they wanted Nyx, if they had spent years tracking him, there were answers here. They needed to get to the main lab. Eve sprinted down the corridor, Nyx at her side. The layout was burned into her mind, guiding her through the maze of ruined hallways until she reached the reinforced door at the end of the passage. It was still intact. She swiped a stolen keycard. Red light. Denied. Her jaw clenched. No time for subtlety. She stepped back and placed a charge against the lock. The explosion was small, contained, but enough to blast the door open. Inside, the lab was untouched. Rows of glass containment units lined the walls, their surfaces clouded with age. Computers sat idle, monitors frozen on long-dead programs. The air smelled of antiseptic and rust. And, at the center of the room, a tank. Eve's breath hitched. It was massive, reinforced with layers of metal and glass. Inside, floating in murky liquid, was another Nyx. No, not him. Another like him. The realization sent ice through her veins. Project Fenrir hadn't been about making one. Nyx let out a deep, guttural sound. Not a growl, not a snarl. Something almost like recognition. The monitors beside the tank flickered to life. A voice crackled over unseen speakers. "I was wondering when you'd come back." Eve spun, rifle raised. A figure stepped out of the shadows. Not a hunter, not a soldier, a scientist. His lab coat was pristine despite the decay of the facility, his expression calm, almost expectant. He adjusted his glasses, gaze settling on Nyx. "Impressive," he murmured. "You kept him alive much longer than we anticipated." Rage boiled in Eve's chest. She kept her aim steady. "Start talking." The scientist smiled. "You don't understand what you've stolen, do you?" He gestured to the tank, to the thing floating inside. Nyx was never just a weapon. He was a prototype, a proof of concept. Eve's fingers twitched on the trigger. For what? The scientist's smile widened. For something much bigger. A sudden rumbling shook the walls. Nyx's ears flattened. The neural link pulsed with urgency. Something was waking up. The rumbling deepened, vibrating through the floor like the growl of some enormous, unseen beast. Dust rained from the ceiling, the lights flickering erratically. Eve kept her rifle trained on the scientist, her muscles coiled, every instinct screaming at her move. But move where? Nyx prowled beside her, his fur bristling, eyes locked onto the tank. His body was tense, but there was something else in the link between them now. Recognition. A low, thrumming certainty. Eve's stomach twisted. The scientist barely flinched as the lab trembled around them. He adjusted his glasses with unnerving calm, eyes flicking between her and Nyx as if measuring something unseen. "You should leave," he said, "before the real experiment wakes up." The words hit like a bullet. The murky liquid in the tank shifted, not from the shaking, but from movement within. Eve's pulse spiked. The thing inside wasn't just floating anymore. It was rising. Glass groaned. Metal creaked. The containment locks strained as something massive stirred inside. Then the world snapped. The tank exploded. A wave of supercooled fluid rushed outward, sending shards of reinforced glass through the air like shrapnel. Eve dove to the side, rolling as a razor-sharp fragment sliced past her cheek. Nyx moved in a blur, shielding her with his body as the liquid hissed and evaporated against the floor. And in the center of the wreckage, it stood. A wolf, but not like Nyx. Larger, heavier, unfinished. Its biometal armor gleamed under the emergency lights, its body bulkier, reinforced with thick plating. Wires and exposed neural fibers ran along its spine like grotesque veins, its movements stiff, half machine, half instinct. Its eyes flickered erratically, an eerie white glow pulsing in and out of sync. It took a step forward, the floor groaning beneath its weight. Eve barely breathed. The thing was unstable. She could see it in the way its limbs twitched, the way its head jerked slightly, as if listening to something no one else could hear. Nyx's growl rumbled through the room, low and dangerous. He stepped in front of Eve, muscles coiled. The new wolf turned its head toward him, movement sharp, unnatural. Recognition flickered in its malfunctioning eyes. And then it attacked. The impact was like a thunderclap. Nyx met the charge head-on, the two titans colliding in a blur of claws and snapping jaws. The lab shook as they slammed into walls, sending debris crashing down around them. Sparks flew as metal scraped metal, their snarls mixing with the screech of tearing steel. Eve moved fast. The scientist had vanished in the chaos, coward. But she had no time to think about him. Nyx was fast, but the other one was stronger. It moved with raw, unchecked power, every strike sending shockwaves through the room. Nyx dodged a crushing blow, his claws raking against its exposed wiring, sending sparks cascading from its side. Eve raised her rifle, lining up a shot. The new wolf snapped its head toward her. Recognition, understanding. A programmed response. And it charged. Eve fired, but the bullets barely slowed it. It was faster than something that size should have been, moving with brutal precision. She had seconds. Then Nyx was there. He slammed into it from the side, knocking it off course. Eve hit the ground, rolling to avoid the wreckage as the two wolves crashed through what remained of the lab. The facility's warning klaxons howled to life, a mechanical voice echoing through the halls. Containment breach detected. Security protocols engaged. Eve's heart pounded. If the system engaged full lockdown, they'd be trapped inside. She had to end this. Her eyes flicked to the exposed wires trailing from the new wolf side. A weakness. Nyx, she shouted through the link. He understood before she even finished the thought. Nyx moved in a blur, darting around his enemy, forcing it to shift, to turn, to expose its side. Eve didn't hesitate. She fired. The bullet struck deep, burying into the mess of exposed neural fibers. A pulse of electricity surged through the new wolf's body, its frame locking up violently. Its movements spasmed, eyes flickering wildly between white and darkness. Nyx lunged. His fangs sank into the weak point, ripping through wires and plating with brutal efficiency. The new wolf let out a distorted, static-filled snarl, one final sound before its body gave out beneath it. It crashed to the ground. Sparks hissed. A final shudder ran through its frame. Then, silence. Eve let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Nyx stepped back, breathing heavy, his bioluminescence pulsing erratically with exhaustion. Blood, not his, dripped from his jaws. But he was alive. The facility alarms still blared. The system was locking everything down. If they didn't move now, they wouldn't get another chance. Eve sprinted to the nearest console, fingers flying across the ancient keyboard. She accessed the security system, bypassing what little resistance the failing AI still had. A map flickered onto the screen. There, an escape route. She turned to Nyx. We're leaving. The link hummed in agreement. They ran. Through the collapsing corridors, past broken containment units, and half-forgotten horrors. The facility groaned, steel screaming as the lockdown protocol took effect. The whole structure was coming down on itself. Eve pushed harder, lungs burning, muscles screaming. The exit was close. She could see the pale glow of the jungle beyond. A gunshot. She twisted, too slow. Pain seared through her side. She hit the ground, breath ragged, fingers slick with blood. A figure stepped into view. The scientist. He held a smoking pistol, his expression unreadable. You should have left when I gave you the chance. Eve gritted her teeth, her vision blurring. The world tilted, darkness creeping in. Then the link flared. Pure, raw fury. Nyx moved. She had never seen him like this. No hesitation, no restraint. He tore into the scientist, a blur of fangs and wrath. The man barely had time to scream before he was gone. Eve coughed, tasting copper. Nyx was there instantly, nudging her, his warmth grounding her against the creeping cold. The link pulsed with desperation. Urgency. Stay awake. She forced herself up. One step. Another. They had to go. The exit loomed ahead. The jungle waited beyond. They crossed the threshold just as the facility collapsed behind them. The explosion lit up the night, fire and debris swallowing everything they had left behind. The past was buried beneath ruin and flame. Eve collapsed against a tree, pressing a hand to her bleeding side. The pain was sharp, but she was alive. Nyx settled beside her, massive and solid, his breathing heavy. They had survived. The hunters would come. More would follow. But it didn't matter. They had each other. And that was enough.